What's up guys, this is Zero Reigns, and welcome to my guide for how to be a better tank in patch 2.56 leading up to heavensward. So I decided to make this guide for a few reasons. The first being Dark Knight, which will be released in heavensward at level 30, and the second is for newer or maybe experienced players who have never really tried tanking before. The goal for this guide is for how to tank if you're a beginning or maybe an intermediate player. If you're an expert or a veteran tank, you probably won't need these tips, but you never know, you might learn something new, so stick around. I'll be splitting this guide into two parts. The first is tanking for beginners, and the second will be tanking for a more intermediate class. The beginner's guide will pretty much cover everything from 1 to 50. How to establish aggro, how to watch your hate meters, where to pull mobs, and make sure your party doesn't wipe. For the intermediate level, we're basically going to cover how to use your skills more efficiently, how to use your cooldowns more effectively, what you should spec your character with your extra points, and what it truly means to tank into endgame raids. So with that said, let's get started. Great, so you want to be a tank. Now comes the hardest part, deciding which one you want to play. Currently, the two tanks in the game are Paladin and Warrior, each with several distinct differences. Let's start off with Paladin, the mitigation master. Paladin is your classic sword and board class, and as you can imagine, Paladin offers a great arsenal of mitigation cooldowns. They both have two oaths, stances that you can swap between, that allow more versatile play. Shield Oath, being Paladin's tanking stance, reduces all damage by 20%, while dealing 20% reduced damage to mobs to balance. Shield Oath also has increased enmity, or hate, on your skills. Shield Oath also, alongside Paladin's kit of several strong cooldowns, makes it a strong pick for any type of encounter. Paladin can also access Sword Oath, while not reducing damage taken, increases your auto attack potencies by 50, and not reducing your damage dealt. This is a great tool for when there is no need for Shield Oath, or when DPS checks require you to produce more damage than Shield Oath can offer. For as sturdy of a tank as what Paladin is, it does still have some issues. Unfortunately, when you compare the DPS between a Paladin and a Warrior main tank, Paladin's DPS is much lower. Also, because of Paladin's Oath stances, they are on the global cooldown, so when you want to swap between one or the other, it breaks any chain in your combo, and it requires a wait. So this is inefficient when time constraints need you to swap quickly. Also, Paladin's cooldowns are on a much longer timer to that compared to a Warrior, so especially in raid, you need to be sure when you're going to be popping your cooldowns. So in short, Paladin knows exactly what it wants to do, to take hits and provide party support. This is also the most popular tank out of the two choices, so be prepared, it might be kinda hard to find a static. Also, this job is most associated with the main tank role, so be prepared for that. Next up is Warrior, the mighty DPS tank. Warrior plays a very versatile role in raid, and is able to dish out a lot of damage as either the main tank or the off tank. Most notably different from Paladins, they only have one stance, Defiance, which increases your HP by 25% and reduces the damage you deal by 25%, and these skills also increase your enmity. Warriors utilize Wrath, a mechanic that stacks up to 5 times, allowing certain actions to be unleashed, most notably Inner Beast, their main mitigation cooldown. Warrior is also a very strong DPS tank, and will out DPS Paladins in the same main tank role by a pretty good margin. Seeing as Wrath is tied to several of Warrior's skills, knowing when to use your Wrath for mitigation, or when to use them for other skills is key. I'll go into this a bit later. For as awesome as Warriors are, they also have a lot of downsides. Unfortunately, Warriors come with very little mitigation, namely only 3 skills. It's also easier to heal a Paladin by a little bit compared to a Warrior. Warrior stacks also tie into their mitigation, so using an Inner Beast early may result in no mitigation for the next hit. Warriors also provide one skill for party support, Mantra, much less to that of a Paladin. Warriors are also generally aggro machines, and a bad Warrior will snap aggro if they aren't paying attention. And sadly, there is still a stigma that Warriors cannot main tank as well as Paladins. Ignore this and tank it anyway. So, to summarize, Warrior has high DPS, whether it be the main tank or the off tank, but Paladins can provide a bit more damage than a Warrior if the Warrior is main tank and the Paladin is off tank. Just something to note, but they have to be similarly geared and spec'd. With their short CDs, they can make on-the-fly judgments, but know what you're doing with your Wrath stacks, which is the most important part, and is generally played as the off tank due to how the nature of the beast is played. High snap aggro can rotate your debuffs easier with high AoE. And there is still that stigma about Warriors, but like I said, ignore that. Warriors were buffed back in 2.1, making them just as viable, if not better, than Paladins in most situations. So that's a very basic synopsis on how each of the two tanks operates in this game. Obviously there is so much more you can get into with these two jobs, but I'll save that for another video for another time. We're here to get to the nitty gritty, how to tank 1 to 50. Let's get started. Alrighty, the most basic thing to learn about tanking is understanding the threat meter. And this game does a very nice job of understanding where you are currently in threat, or if you are the main tank. So the easiest way to check this is to look left of your party UI. You'll see a small rectangle box that has a lot of different bars that are filling. If your bar is completely full and has an A next to it, you are the primary tank. If your bar is close to full, or not very full, you're starting to establish aggro. They also have color-coded objects for this, which I'll go over in a minute. This is a very nice tool to tell if you're starting to lose aggro to a white mage or to a DPS, and how to go accordingly from there. Although this is a very nice tool for understanding aggro, it's not always the fastest or most immediate way to tell if you have something. So they put in a color-coded way to determine if you have hate or someone is building hate. To the bottom left, you'll see a whole bunch of different ads, and you'll see different colored markers by each of those ads. Red means you have aggro. Flashing orange means you are about to take aggro. Orange means you have a ton of hate and you're probably going to take it soon. Yellow means you're about medium on the hate, you're not really anywhere near taking it, but you know, it's something to be careful of. And green means you have absolutely no aggro. Yellow is usually fine for DPS and heals. Orange is where you want to be careful if you're not trying to take hate. If you are the main tank, you obviously want to keep it red for the duration that you have that mob. Now that you have an understanding of how hate works in this game, it's important to understand how to establish hate. And this is one of the biggest difficulties for a lot of newer tanks, to understand how to grab a group of mobs, or even how to grab a single mob and keep it. To start off, I'm going to show you the most basic of all openers, the 1-2-3 combo. This combo is incredibly inefficient and is actually more of a DPS loss than anything. So this should only be used mid-combo once you've already established hate as part of just your normal routine. Try not to open with this at all. At this point, seeing as mobs aggro before you're in melee range, it's not really a good idea to start getting aggro once you're in their face. So one of the more popular methods is the tomahawk or shield lob pull, followed into your combo, as shown here. Again, this is still not the full combo you need to do to fully get the maximized DPS out of your opener, but this just gives you a very general idea of how to secure aggro from a distance and keep the mob with you. Also, it's important to remember two simple rules of thumb when pulling a mob. The first is to commit. Don't stutter step, make sure you get to that mob ASAP. The second is to make sure you turn the mob away from the group. Due to that, most mobs cleave, and DPS need positional requirements such as a monk and a dragoon, so getting it to where it needs to be quickly is the most efficient. Only on certain mobs can you turn it to face the party, but that's on a per fight thing, so as a general rule of thumb, keep it away from the party. The last thing you want to take note of before pulling a mob is what is your opening, and that is the most efficient use of your cooldowns before pulling the mob to get the most out of DPS. This just basically happens when you're really comfortable on your job, and there are a lot of ways to open up depending on your party comp and what your party is comfortable with. For most purposes, starting with the shield lob and the tomahawk throw into your basic enmity combo is great. As you can see here, my warrior actually opens different from my paladin, but like I said, do what you feel most comfortable with to get the aggro on the mob. Now that you've learned how to do hate on a single target, how do you get hate across a group of mobs? And this does change a little bit from your opening, since you can't just do 1, 2, 3 on all of the ads. You kind of have to space out how your AoE enmity is going to work. So in these next two examples is the most pure and basic form of AoE generation. Again, this is not advised, this is just the most basic form of how to get AoE hate. As you level up your job, you gain access to higher tier skills. Here, we're going to showcase the big 4 AoE enmity tools: Flash, Overpower, Steel Cyclone, and Circle of Scorn. It's important to note that Flash, Steel Cyclone, and Circle of Scorn are all AoE enmity tools, while Overpower is the only tool that is in a cone. So as you can see here, I start off with Warrior Steel Cyclone, which is in a circle, followed by Overpower, which is in a cone. This allows me to get hate on the initial mobs and then group them together and face them away from the party to continue my AoE assault. For Paladin, this is much easier. I start off with Circle of Scorn, followed by Flash Spam, and interweaving my normal combo in between. Due to that Flash has no direct damage like Overpower, it's important to keep your combo chain going. A quick note, since Flash has no damage, it may need to be used several times in quick succession and continually used throughout your combo chain to ensure you keep hate. While Warrior's Overpower is linked with damage, it is much easier to keep hate while only doing it a few times. One of the most important tools when used in tanking is the targeting ring, which is found underneath every single mob that you aggro. Here, I'll go into a little bit of detail on how the targeting ring works. The targeting ring is comprised of 4 areas. The front, where the giant arrow is, will always show where the mob is facing. Also, near the front is the cleave zone, so that's why we face the mob away from the group. So be sure no one is standing in the cleave zone but the tank. Also, the flank is right on the sides of the targeting ring. This is where most of the melees perform their flanks and rear positionals. Also, speaking of the rear, that is in the very back of the targeting ring, marked by the empty space. So, to summarize, watch your threat meter. Watch your mob's targeting ring to ensure your placement of the mobs is correct. Practice your opener to ensure you get hit on either a single or a group of mobs every time. That covers the 1 to 50 portion. Now I'll go into cooldown management, skill interactions, and advanced aggro tactics. Getting aggro on a non-engaged mob is easy enough, but what about when an ad pops during the middle of an encounter? What if the party just took a large amount of damage and the healers will be using a large aggro ability the same time it pops? This is where the term snap aggro comes from, the ability to grab a mob's attention quickly to ensure it does not run off into the party and start killing your party members. Snap aggro is achieved in several ways, but here is the best way I have found to achieve snap aggro on both Warrior and Paladin. For both jobs, I do my best to understand when the ad spawn timing is. This is generally done through research or just doing the encounter several times. Once I know the spawn timing, I will queue up a Savage Blade or a Skull Sunderer. Both of these abilities go into your biggest enmity attack, Rage of Harlone and Butcher's Block. But due to both of these attacks having a long animation time, Savage Blade and Skull Sunderer are great in a pinch because of their short animation times, following into the even bigger enmity gain when you perform the next chain in your combo. This is where the differences lie. For Warrior, there are 2 paths to achieve the same snap aggro goal. The first is the former I told you about, a queued up Skull Sunderer into Butchers. A good thing to remember is their stun attack Brutal Swing is off the GCD, or global cooldown. This allows you to animation cancel, which leads to my second way of achieving snap aggro. Queue up for a Butcher's Block, and then when the ad pops, begin to use Butcher's Block, followed by spamming your Brutal Swing button until the animation for Butcher's Block is cancelled. This provides an even greater snap enmity tool, but please note this requires you to keep Brutal Swing up, and not using Brutal Swing often falls to a small DPS loss, so using the former method is what I prefer for most encounters. For Paladins, this is a bit more straightforward. I will often queue up a Savage Blade, and when the mob pops, I will begin hitting it with Savage, followed by a Circle of Scorn to Rage of Harlone. This provides a hefty amount of enmity in a short duration, but note, saving Circle of Scorn is a DPS loss, so practice using Savage into Rage for most situations. It is also important to remember that for both jobs, Berserk and Fight or Flight increases your damage dealt. This directly ties into your enmity, so having these skills up when an ad pops will also help you establish aggro. Using cooldowns is one of the most simplistic yet complicated mechanics in this game. The way endgame works, one small mistake can lead to a party wipe. So, understanding how to properly rotate your cooldowns is more important than ever. Of course, learning when to use your cooldowns is part knowing the fight mechanics and knowing your job mechanics. The fight mechanics can only be learned by watching or doing the encounter, thus memorization of the fight. Job mechanics are what you can control the first time you step foot into an encounter, and here is a simple checklist as the tank I use when deciding how and when to use my cooldowns and skills. Number 1. Do not use your cooldowns just because they are up. Always have a reason for wanting to pop something. As a tank, trust in your healers is key. This leads to number 2. Watch your healers. If you happen to notice a healer has died, used a big cooldown, like Benediction, or is running low on mana, make the judgment call to use a cooldown to help alleviate the situation. Remember, always have a reason for using a cooldown, and determining the party status is one of them. Number 3. Know your abilities. For Paladins, their Harlone combo provides a strength down Y 10%, while Warrior Storm's Path reduces damage dealt by enemies by 10%. By assessing if these skills are up, you can avoid using a strong cooldown altogether. Watching your own buffs is also a good habit to get into. Healers will use protective mitigation like Stone Skin, Adlos, Succors, and Regens. By assessing that these buffs are on you, you can eat a huge tank buster without ever having to use a single cooldown. This isn't an excuse for not using a cooldown when they should be used, but something to note. And the final tip, number 4, know when to use a cooldown. Be watchful of hard-hitting abilities to you, known as tank busters, or hard-hitting attacks to party members. Paladins can cover members, as shown here. When you cover, you take their physical damage for them, so be mindful of your own HP. So in short, always be mindful of your own status. Keep an eye on your healers. Trust in their ability to heal you through auto attacks, and try not to panic and hit a cooldown because you went under 20% HP. Character Specialization is a nice little buff that allows you to add 30 extra stat points into any given primary stat, which usually corresponds with your role. For example, a tank would normally spec into Vitality for more HP. It's worth noting that this is a hotly debated topic, and these are my personal thoughts on it. For people who say your job in the end is just a tank, and putting all your points in the VIT is an incorrect answer. Vitality is only as good as when you're hitting its effective threshold. For example, if you gain 500 HP, but you never need that 500 HP for anything, it's effectively wasted. On the reverse side, putting all your points in the strength may leave you on an HP threshold where your healers are not comfortable keeping you alive. My personal suggestion is this: if you are very comfortable on your job and job mechanics, and are decently geared for the encounter, 30 strength is the way to go. It helps with DPS checks, gathering enmity, and makes good use of abilities like Bloodbath. If you are a newer tank, or progressing into content, 30 VIT may be the route to go, but I would advise 15 strength, 15 VIT. For myself, I prefer 30 strength in the warrior because that is my main, and I am very comfortable on how it operates. Paladin is my off job, and seeing as I use it occasionally, I spec either 15 strength, 15 VIT, or 30 VIT depending. One last thing you should note is depending on your role in the current content, whether you're the main tank or the off tank, should heavily influence how your points are put into it. For example, on T11, I will oftentimes put my points into VIT because a lot of healers in the Duty Finder are not capable of keeping a warrior alive at 30 strength. So just use this to your best judgment. So that pretty much wraps up my tanking guide 1 to 50 and a few of the intermediate tips going up into endgame raids. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you learned anything new or enjoyed the video, please give it a like. And happy tanking! I'll see you guys in Heavensward.